Imagine standing on the doorstep of your dream life, holding the keys to a private jet and a billion-dollar merger, only to realize the person holding your hand is actually sharpening a knife behind your back. Most people think a hitman looks like a movie villain in a dark alley, but in the world of the ultra-wealthy, danger doesn't wear a mask. No, it wears a designer dress and pours your morning coffee. My name is Julian Vane, and I was exactly 3 steps away from vanishing off the face of the earth, and the only reason I'm alive to tell you this story is because a 10-year-old girl noticed something that I, a world-class CEO, was too busy to see. It was a Tuesday, the kind of grey, drizzly morning in Seattle where the fog clings to the evergreens surrounding my estate like a shroud. I was in my usual zone, adjusting my Rolex, juggling 2 iPhones, and mentally rehearsing a pitch for a skyscraper project in Dubai. I was late, as always. My wife, Isabella, had been the one to call the car. She stood in the foyer, looking effortlessly elegant in a cream-colored silk robe, her hand resting gently on my shoulder as she reminded me to take my vitamins. She looked like the portrait of a devoted spouse. "The car is at the gate, Julian," she whispered, her voice as smooth as velvet. "Don't keep them waiting. This flight is everything we've worked for." I nodded, kissed her cheek, and hurried out the door. I saw the black sedan idling at the end of the long, stone driveway. It was the same model I'd ridden in for 3 years. The driver was already standing by the rear door. I was halfway down the walkway when a small, firm hand suddenly gripped my wrist, pulling me toward the dense boxwood hedges. It was Maya, the housekeeper's daughter. She was usually quiet, a shadow in the garden with her sketchbook, but today her eyes were wide with a frantic, primal fear. "Stay quiet." "Follow me," she hissed. I almost shook her off. I was Julian Vane, I had boards to chair and millions to move. I didn't have time for games. But there was a coldness in her tone that stopped my heart. She led me behind a row of oversized decorative planters that blocked the view from the house. "And the gate." "Please, stay low," she pleaded. I hesitated, then crouched beside her, my $5,000 suit brushing against the damp gravel. "Maya, what is this?" "I have a plane to catch," I snapped quietly. She didn't look at me, she pointed through a gap in the leaves toward the car. "That's not your driver," she said. I scoffed. "Of course it is. It's Marcus. He's been with us forever." But Maya shook her head, her voice trembling but certain. "No, sir. Marcus always opens the door with his right hand because he keeps the keys in his left pocket. I watch him every morning from the kitchen window. But today, that man opened the door with his left hand. And the license plate? Look at the end. It's an 8. Your car ends in a 3. I looked again, squinting through the fog. My blood turned to ice. She was right. The car was a perfect replica, the same deep obsidian black, but the plate was wrong. I had looked at that car 1,000 times and never seen it. I was always too busy reading emails. Maya leaned in closer, her breath hitching. "They said this would happen," she whispered. "Yesterday, behind the glass house, I heard your wife talking to a man. They said you wouldn't notice because you're always in a hurry. They said once you get in that car, you aren't going to the airport. You're going somewhere quiet, somewhere you won't come back from." The silence that followed Maya's words was heavier than the Seattle fog. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. You see, in the tech world, we talk about disruption as a good thing, a way to change an industry. But sitting in the dirt behind a flower pot, I realized I was about to be disrupted right out of existence. I wanted to tell myself that Maya was just a child with a wild imagination, but the cold, hard logic of that license plate was staring me in the face. Maya tugged my sleeve again, her eyes darting toward the garden path. "We have to move, sir. If they see us here, it's over." I followed her, staying low, our movements masked by the thick, manicured hedges of the Vane estate. She led me toward the back garden, specifically toward the glass greenhouse, my wife's sanctuary. Usually, I loved that building. Its transparent walls represented the clarity I claimed to run my life with. Now, it looked like a cage. We stopped behind a tall row of bushes just as two figures emerged onto the stone path. My breath hitched. There was Isabella, still in her light silk robe, looking like an angel. But she wasn't alone. Walking beside her was a man I had never seen, sharply dressed, with a predatory gait that suggested he was very comfortable in expensive spaces. They stopped near the greenhouse door, thinking the mist and the morning hour had granted them total privacy. Then, the world I had spent 15 years building shattered. Isabella reached up, her hand cupping the man's face with a tenderness she hadn't shown me in months. She leaned in and kissed him. I stood frozen, my hand still half raised from where I had been about to check my watch. My mind raced, trying to find an excuse, a misunderstanding, anything to stop the reality from sinking in. But then she spoke, and her voice, the voice that had whispered "I love you" before every flight, sounded like a stranger's. "Just a little longer, Ryan," she said, her forehead resting against his. "When this is over, we won't have to hide anymore. I'm tired of playing the grieving wife before the funeral has even happened." The man, Ryan, laughed, a low, practical sound. "The driver is ready. He knows the spot. No cameras, no witnesses. By the time anyone realizes Julian didn't make his meeting, he'll be a ghost." Isabella pulled back, her eyes cold as flint. "He gave me 15 years, Ryan. 15 years of playing second fiddle to a company. If I leave, I'm not leaving with nothing. I'm taking the life he was too busy to live." They began to walk in different directions, Isabella heading back to the house to play her part, and Ryan toward the side gate. I remained behind the bushes, a billionaire standing in the mud, finally realizing that the most dangerous person in my life wasn't a business rival, it was the woman waiting for me at the breakfast table. As I watched her disappear into our home, I felt a vibration in my pocket, my phone ringing with a call from the woman who was just discussing my disappearance. I stared at the screen. "Isabella." I didn't answer. My fingers were trembling as I fumbled for Maya's father's phone, the device she had used to record the conversation. I needed to hear it again. I needed the horror to be loud enough to drown out the 15 years of memories that were currently screaming at me. The recording was even worse the second time. Amidst the sound of wind through the leaves, I heard them discussing the insurance. "You're the primary beneficiary," Ryan's voice said on the tape. 20 million. When he's declared missing, the money goes to you. $20 million. To some, it's a fortune. To me, it was the price tag Isabella had placed on my head. I retreated to my home office through the back entrance, moving like a ghost in my own house. I sat at my desk and did something I almost never do, I turned off my phones. I needed to think, not like a CEO, but like a man whose life was a failing asset. I pulled up my private financial files, searching for something I had surely signed but never truly read. There it was. An update to my life insurance policy from 6 months ago. The coverage had been tripled. I remember the day Isabella had brought a stack of papers into my office while I was on a conference call with Tokyo. "Just some boring estate renewals, honey," she had said, flashing that perfect, supportive smile. I had signed it without looking, my mind already on the next deal. I had literally authorized my own execution while trying to make a profit. The betrayal went deeper than just the money. I began to look back at the last year through a new lens. The charity trips Isabella took alone. The late nights she said she had already eaten. The way our marriage had become two ships passing in the night, fueled by my obsession with the company. I had thought we were efficient. She had thought I was a paycheck that hadn't expired yet. I picked up my desk phone and called the one man I knew I could trust, Martin Hale, my lead counsel and friend for 20 years. When he answered, I didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Martin, I need you to find out everything you can on a man named Ryan Keller," I said, my voice sounding like it belonged to someone else. "And Martin? I need to know how someone is declared legally dead without a body." There was a long silence on the other end. Martin knew me. He knew I didn't ask questions like that for fun. "Julian, what's going on?" he asked, his voice low and urgent. Someone is planning for me to disappear, Martin, I replied, looking out the window at the black sedan that was still waiting patiently at my gate. Just as Martin began to respond, the door to my office clicked open, and Isabella stepped in, her eyes scanning the room with a terrifyingly calm curiosity. "There you are, Julian," Isabella said, her voice a perfect imitation of concern. "I went to the front and the driver said you never got in the car. What happened? Did you miss your flight?" I looked at her, and for the first time in 15 years, I really saw her. I saw the way she stood, the way her eyes darted to my briefcase, checking if I was actually leaving or just stalling. "I decided not to go," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I felt off. I think I need a few days at home." The mask slipped for a fraction of a second, a flicker of annoyance, perhaps even panic. Her entire plan relied on my schedule, on my predictable need to be somewhere else. By staying home, I had just thrown a wrench into the gears of her execution machine. "But that meeting in Chicago is so important," she urged, stepping closer, her hand reaching for my arm. "You've been talking about it for weeks. Are you sure you're okay? You look tired." I pulled away, pretending to reach for a file. "I'll reschedule, Isabella. The world won't end if Julian Vane takes a nap." The rest of the day was a psychological chess match. I stayed in my office, watching the security feeds. The black sedan finally left the gate at noon, but I knew it would be back. I saw Isabella in the garden, her phone pressed to her ear, her movements agitated. She was calling Ryan. She was telling him the package hadn't been delivered. That evening, we sat across from each other at the dinner table. The candles were lit, the wine was poured, and Mrs. Gable had prepared a perfect meal. It was a scene of domestic bliss that felt like a funeral wake. Isabella was talking about the Harpers, about charity auctions, about the mundane details of our life. I watched the way she sipped her wine, wondering if she had already started thinking about how to get rid of me right here in this room. "Elizabeth," I said, using the name she hated, just to see her reaction. "Do you ever feel like we've become strangers?" She paused, the glass halfway to her lips. "That's a strange thing to say at dinner, Julian. Is it? Or is it just the truth?" I replied. She gave a small, hollow laugh. "We're just stressed. You need rest. Tomorrow will be better." I realized then that she didn't just want my money, she wanted the relief of my absence. I was a burden she had decided to liquidate. As she smiled at me over the rim of her glass, I felt a cold chill settle into my bones. I wasn't just sitting at a dinner table, I was sitting in a trap that was still very much open. After dinner, as she headed upstairs, she whispered, "Sleep well, Julian," but her eyes were fixed on my phone, which I had purposely left on the counter. The moment the bedroom door clicked shut, I was back in my office. Martin had sent a secured file to my private server. My tech background isn't just for show, I built my empire on data, and now, data was going to save my life. I opened the file and began to pull the thread on Ryan Keller. Keller wasn't a professional hitman. He was something much more common in Seattle, a failed entrepreneur with a taste for a life he couldn't afford. He had millions in debt, failed real estate ventures, and a history of consulting for wealthy wives. He was the perfect tool for Isabella. He had the charm to manipulate her and the desperation to carry out a crime. But the real shock came when I looked at the driver's records. My regular driver, Marcus, hadn't called in sick. He hadn't been fired. He had simply been redirected by an email sent from my own account, an account Isabella had access to. The man in the black sedan that morning was a freelancer, a guy with a commercial license and a record of discreet transport services. Isabella hadn't just hired a killer, she had outsourced my kidnapping like a business project. I traced the money. 2 weeks ago, Ryan Keller had received a loan from an offshore account. 3 days later, that same amount was paid to the freelance driver. They were sloppy. They thought I was too busy looking at stock tickers to notice a few $1,000s moving through the cracks of our estate accounts. "Julian, we have enough to go to the cops right now," Martin's voice came through my laptop. This is conspiracy to commit kidnapping. We have the financial trail, the recording, the photos. I stared at the screen, at the face of the man my wife was sleeping with, and felt a steady, cold anger replace the shock. No, Martin, I said. If we go now, Isabella will play the victim. She'll say Ryan manipulated her. She'll say she was confused. Her lawyers will bury this in a decade of litigation, and she'll walk away with half my estate in a divorce settlement anyway. I didn't want a legal battle, I wanted a confession. I wanted her to walk right into the grave she had dug for me. What are you thinking? Martin asked, his voice filled with dread. I looked at the calendar on my desk. Monday. The original day of my disappearance. I'm thinking I need to go to Chicago after all, I said. I'm going to give her exactly what she wants. I'm going to get into that car. I heard Martin gasp on the other end, but my eyes were already on the security monitor, watching Isabella creep down the hallway toward my office door. I shut the laptop just as the door handle turned. I didn't look up, I pretended to be deep in a spreadsheet. Isabella entered, carrying a small plate of fruit. You're still up, darling, she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. You really should rest. I know, I said, finally looking at her. I've been thinking about what you said. About the Chicago meeting. You're right. I can't let the company down. I've rescheduled for Monday morning. 9 a.m. Same flight, same plan. I saw the flash of triumph in her eyes, a predatory spark she couldn't quite hide. She thought she had won. She thought the busy billionaire had fallen back into his predictable rhythm. That's my Julian, she said, leaning down to kiss my forehead. Her skin felt like ice. I'll make sure everything is ready. The car, the bags, everything. I'm sure you will, I replied, forcing a smile that felt like it was cracking my face. Monday morning arrived with a cold, biting wind. I went through the routine perfectly. I dressed in my best suit, packed my briefcase, and had coffee in the kitchen while Isabella watched me like a hawk. We were two actors in the final scene of a very long play. She even adjusted my tie, her fingers lingering near my throat for a second too long. Travel safe, Julian, she whispered as we stood at the front door. I'll be waiting for your call when you land. I'll call you the moment I arrive where I'm going, I promised. I walked down the steps toward the black sedan waiting at the gate. I didn't look at the driver's hands this time. I didn't check the plate. I knew exactly what was waiting for me. I got into the back seat and closed the door. As we pulled away, I saw Isabella standing on the porch, her hand raised in a slow, elegant wave. She looked beautiful. She looked like a woman who was finally, after 15 years, about to be free. The car turned onto the main road, heading away from the estate. For 10 minutes, we drove in silence. Then, we reached the highway interchange. Instead of taking the exit for SeaTac Airport, the driver kept going straight, heading south toward the industrial docks of the harbor. You missed the turn, I said casually, my eyes fixed on my phone. Traffic report, sir, the driver grunted, his voice tight. Different route is faster. I looked up, meeting his eyes in the rearview mirror. Is it faster for the flight, or faster for the insurance payout? The car swerved violently as the driver's foot jerked on the pedal, his face going pale as he realized he wasn't driving a victim, he was driving a witness. The driver's eyes in the rearview mirror were no longer cold, they were frantic. The car swerved slightly as we bypassed the airport exit, the GPS on the dashboard now showing a desolate route toward an old shipyard in the Tacoma Industrial District. For a billionaire like me, life is usually a series of high-speed movements where every second is accounted for, but sitting in the back of this sedan, time seemed to stretch into something agonizingly slow. I didn't reach for the door handle. I didn't scream. In business, you never show your hand until the other side has already committed to their mistake. I simply leaned back, my voice as calm as if I were discussing quarterly earnings. You know, son, I said, watching the grey warehouses blur past, Isabella probably told you this was a simple job. She probably promised you a life-changing amount of cash for just a few days of work. But did she mention that she's already recorded herself talking about your role in my disappearance? The driver's grip on the steering wheel tightened until his knuckles turned white. I don't know what you're talking about, Mr. Vane, he muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. I leaned forward slightly, closing the distance between us. She didn't tell you about the recording Maya made in the greenhouse, did she? I pulled out my phone and played just 3 seconds of Isabella's voice. The driver knows where to take him, no cameras, no neighbors. The sound of her cold calculation filled the quiet car like a lethal gas. The driver's jaw dropped. He looked at the phone, then at the road, then back at me. She said this was just a business relocation, he stammered, his facade finally cracking. I'm a businessman, so let's talk business, I countered. Right now, you are driving toward a 20-year prison sentence for kidnapping. Isabella will have her high-priced lawyers to say she was confused or manipulated by her lover. But you? You're the man who was found with the billionaire in the trunk. Who do you think the police will believe? We were miles away from anyone who could help us now, deep in a maze of rusted shipping containers and empty lots. The gate to a private storage facility was approaching, its tall metal fence looking like the entrance to my own grave. The driver's hand hovered over the remote to the gate, his fingers shaking. He looked at the black unmarked SUV that had just appeared in his side mirror. Martin and the tactical team were following exactly as planned. That SUV behind us? That's not your backup, I said quietly. That's the reality of your situation. You still have 10 seconds to decide if you want to be a kidnapper or a witness. One of those gets you a lawyer. The other gets you a cell. The car slowed to a crawl just as we reached the grinding metal gate. The driver stared at the dark building ahead, that small place where nobody can hear you that Isabella had described. He looked back at the unmarked police vehicles closing the gap, their presence silent but absolute. With a sudden, desperate sob, he slammed the car into reverse. We didn't enter the facility. Instead, he pulled the sedan sideways across the road and threw his hands up as the officers surrounded the vehicle. I stepped out into the cold Tacoma air, feeling the first real breath of freedom I'd had in weeks. Detective Harris walked toward me, his expression grim. We have the driver, Mr. Vane. He's terrified. He's ready to tell us everything about Isabella and Ryan Keller. I nodded, looking at the city skyline in the distance where my wife was likely pouring herself a celebratory glass of champagne. Don't arrest her yet, I told Harris. I want to be the one to tell her that the flight was cancelled. Harris looked at me with concern. Mr. Vane, that's dangerous. We don't know how she'll react when the plan fails. I looked at the police car where the driver was already being handcuffed and realized that Isabella didn't know the most important rule of the game: never assume the person you're watching isn't watching you back. I got into the back of the detective's car, my mind already rehearsing the final confrontation. The drive back to the estate felt different. I was no longer the prey, but the hunter. As we pulled up to the long stone driveway, I saw the lights on in my office. She was in there, probably looking through my files, thinking she was already the owner of everything I had built. I stepped through the front door, the silence of the house no longer feeling peaceful, but predatory. I walked toward the living room where Isabella was sitting with a book, looking like the picture of a grieving widow-to-be. She looked up, and for the first time, I saw her perfect composure shatter into a million jagged pieces. Julian, she whispered, her voice trembling. What are you doing here? The driver said, he said you were on your way. I didn't say a word. I simply pulled out my phone and placed it on the coffee table between us, pressing a play on the recording from the greenhouse. The room filled with her own cold, calculating voice talking about my life insurance. As the recording played, Isabella's face went from pale to a ghostly white. She didn't scream. She didn't deny it. She just stared at the phone as if it were a bomb that had finally gone off in her hands. The driver didn't make a mistake, Isabella, I said, my voice echoing in the hollow room. He made a choice. And now, so have I. I waited for her to speak, to offer some lie or some excuse, but the only sound in the house was the ticking of the clock, a clock that had just run out for her. Just as I prepared to call Harris inside, Isabella reached into the side of the sofa, her hand clenching something I couldn't see, and her eyes turned from fear to a cold, desperate rage I had never seen before. Isabella's hand remained hidden in the cushions, her knuckles white, her eyes burning with a resentment that had clearly been festering for years. "You think you've won, don't you, Julian?" she hissed, her voice no longer the velvet whisper of a supportive wife but the sharp edge of a razor. I stood my ground, my hands in my pockets, refusing to give her the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. "I didn't win, Isabella," I replied calmly. "I survived. There's a difference. Winning implies a game, but this was my life you were trying to erase for a $20 million payout." She let out a short, hysterical laugh that echoed off the high marble ceilings. "Erase? You erased yourself a long time ago. You were never here. You were in Tokyo, in Dubai, in meetings that mattered more than your own home." The raw bitterness in her voice was staggering. She began to pace the room, her robe fluttering behind her like a shroud. "I gave you 15 years of my youth, playing the perfect wife at your boring charity dinners while you ignored me for a stock ticker," she screamed, the mask of the elegant socialite completely gone now. "I was a decoration in your life, Julian. A piece of furniture you only noticed when you needed someone to adjust your tie. Ryan actually saw me." I watched her, feeling a profound sense of sadness that overshadowed the anger. "So Ryan saw you, and in return, you saw a way to murder me for my insurance policy?" I asked. "Did he tell you he has millions in personal debt? That you were his exit strategy, too?" Isabella stopped pacing, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She pulled her hand from the sofa, and for a second, I thought it was a weapon. But it was just her phone. She had been trying to message Ryan, unaware that he was already in a precinct interview room blocks away. "Ryan loves me," she whispered, though it sounded like she was trying to convince herself more than me. "He would never. We were going to start over." I shook my head slowly. "He was going to take your money and run, Isabella. He was using your resentment to fund his failed investments. You were just a means to an end for him, exactly what you accused me of being to you." She looked at the phone on the table, still playing the looped recording of her cold discussion about how long I could survive without food. The reality was finally sinking in. She wasn't going to be a rich, grieving widow, she was going to be a headline in a kidnapping trial. "You wouldn't call the police," she said, her voice dropping to a desperate plea. "Think of the scandal, Julian. The company. Your reputation. You hate scandals. We can settle this quietly. I'll leave. I'll take nothing. Just let me go." I looked at the woman I had shared half my life with and felt like I was looking at a total stranger. "I used to care about scandals more than anything," I said, stepping toward the door. "But then a 10-year-old girl showed me that the truth is worth more than a stock price." She wasn't afraid of the trouble, Isabella. Why should I be? I opened the front door, and Detective Harris stepped into the light, followed by 2 uniformed officers. Isabella didn't move. She didn't even cry. She just sat back down in the chair, her eyes fixed on the photograph of our younger selves on the mantel, a photo from a time when we had nothing but each other. As the officers moved to place the cuffs on her wrists, she looked at me with a hollow, empty expression. "I did love you once," she whispered as they led her toward the door. I stood on the porch and watched the blue and red lights reflect off the windows of the greenhouse, the place where the truth had finally bloomed. Harris stopped beside me, watching the squad car pull away. "It's over, Mr. Vane," he said quietly. I looked toward the gardener's house, where a single light was still burning in the window. "No," I replied, "I think it's just beginning." I walked back into the empty house, the weight of the silence almost crushing, until I realized I wasn't alone. Someone was waiting for me in the garden, and they had one last thing to show me. The morning after Isabella was taken into custody, the sun rose over Seattle with a clarity that felt almost insulting. The house was technically mine again, but as I walked through the cavernous, silent rooms, I realized I had never truly lived here. I had occupied the space, yes, but my spirit had been somewhere else, in boardrooms, on private jets, in the cloud. I walked out to the back garden, the air crisp and smelling of damp cedar. I saw Maya's father, the man I had barely spoken to in 3 years, despite him being the steward of the beauty I looked at every day. He was repairing a wooden bench near the rose garden, his movement steady and patient. "Good morning," I said, my voice sounding rough in the quiet air. He looked up and gave me a respectful but knowing nod. "Good morning, sir," he replied. I stood there for a moment, watching him work. "I realized something yesterday," I said, leaning against the stone wall. "I spent 20 years building a company so I could afford a garden like this, but I never actually knew how to grow anything." The gardener stopped his work and looked at the roses. "A garden doesn't care about your money, Mr. Vane," he said gently. "It only cares about your presence. If you aren't here to notice the small breaks in the fence, the whole thing falls down." I looked toward the stone wall where Maya was sitting with her notebook. She was drawing the greenhouse again, but this time she was adding color, bright, vibrant greens and reds. I walked over and sat beside her, feeling the cool stone against my legs. "Maya," I said, "I want to thank you again." She didn't look up from her page. "My dad says the truth doesn't need to be thanked," she whispered. "It just needs to be heard." I smiled, a real smile for the first time in what felt like decades. I handed her a small set of keys, not to a car or a safe, but to the greenhouse. "This is your space now," I told her. "Plant whatever you want. Flowers, vegetables, the truth." In the months that followed, the Vane estate underwent a transformation that had nothing to do with architecture. I stopped traveling. I promoted my deputy to CEO and took a role as chairman, a position that allowed me to work from the small office near the garden. I learned that a billionaire's greatest asset isn't his stock portfolio, but his ability to be present for the people who actually see him. Isabella's trial was a circus, but I only attended the first day. I didn't need to see her sentenced to know that I had already been given a second chance. Ryan Keller and the driver took their pleas, and the insurance fraud case was closed quietly. The most important lesson I learned didn't come from a business school, it came from a child who noticed a driver used the wrong hand. It taught me that danger is quiet, and so is salvation. Success isn't the number of people who work for you, it's the number of people who will tell you the truth even when it might cost them everything. I still sit on that stone wall with Maya sometimes, watching her draw the life I almost missed. She taught me that if you stay quiet and follow the right people, you might just find your way back home. As I watched the sunset over the Seattle harbor, I realized that the man who got into that car months ago never actually came back, and that was the best thing that ever happened to me. Standing amidst the serene beauty of a life nearly lost, we contemplate the fragility of faith and the immense weight of daily choices. Julian Vane's journey serves as a haunting mirror for anyone caught in the relentless whirlwind of modern ambition, proving that vast wealth is meaningless without awareness of those dearest to us. This story reminds us that the greatest threats to our peace rarely come loudly, instead, they whisper through habits we no longer question and people we take for granted. We learn that success is not simply about accumulating wealth, but about maintaining our presence in the lives of those we love. When we become too preoccupied with the minute details, the way a friend speaks, the change in a lover's gaze, or a child's silent observation, we truly neglect our own lives, leaving the door open for betrayal to enter. The true hero of this story, a young girl with only keen eyes and a pure heart, teaches us that courage knows no age and intelligence has no salary. She proves that attentiveness is the highest form of love and the ultimate survival skill. To apply this to our own lives, we must strive to break free from the trap of being busy and reconnect with the reality around us. We should cherish the Mayas in our lives, the quiet, sincere souls who tell us the truth even when it's unpleasant, and recognize that our character is defined not by how we handle victories, but by how we respect the truth when things are at stake. Let this be a call to slow down, to look deeply into the eyes of those around us, and to build a life where our conscience is as clear as our vision. Please remember that this story is created solely for educational purposes, to illustrate the timeless values of integrity, vigilance, and the human spirit's ability to overcome deception. As the author of this content, I believe this story serves as an important reminder that our humanity is found in the quiet moments we often overlook in our pursuit of the noisy. I've noticed that we often spend our lives building walls to protect our possessions, but forget to build bridges connecting our hearts to the loved ones under our roofs. My view is that true strength lies in those who are steadfast enough to listen to their intuition instead of the noise of their ego. I see Maya not just as a character, but as a symbol of the innate wisdom we all possess if we know how to stop and listen. For me, the greatest tragedy isn't the betrayal, but the years of disconnection that allowed that plan to take root in the first place. I hope this story will inspire you to reevaluate your own life, not for profit, but for the depth of your relationships and the quality of inner peace. I firmly believe that spiritual wealth means living a life where external success never surpasses inner quality. We must remember that while technology and wealth change the world, only empathy and truth have the power to save it. May you find the courage to be present, the strength to be honest, and the wisdom to know the difference between a life of luxury and a life of meaning. This story contains several valuable elements created using AI technology, aiming to provide enjoyable entertainment and convey valuable, emotionally charged lessons to the listener. Disclaimer: this video is for entertainment and educational purposes only. Any resemblance to real people, living or dead, or real events is purely coincidental. The views expressed in this commentary are personal opinions intended to promote positive life values and should not be considered professional legal or psychological advice. Always exercise your own judgment and consult with experts in specific personal situations.